Guys, this is Pradeep Nair. We're looking at metadata-based policies. Metadata-based policies allow administrators to define their building blocks of policies based on metadata. In this example, we are going to look at attributes like stage and PCI that can have values, different values, and then those metadata is then again used to create policies. So instead of defining IP-based source and destination objects, we are going to use metadata to classify different kinds of resources I have within my environment and then define policies for them. And again, in line with keeping it dynamic, we are going to convert each of these each of these objects to a dynamic address groups that will be updated to the firewall. Now, in terms of the configuration under shared objects, you would see now a new object called object metadata. The first step is to define metadata and possible values that it can take. Now, in this example, I have two metadata created. One is PCI and the other is stage. The PCI shows the PCI compliance status for my resource, which could either be true or false. And then the stage kind of defines what stage the application is in its development cycle, which could be dev test, staging, or protection. And we'll use a combination of these two to define access policies within my environment. So once we have the metadata defined, the next step would be to apply them to objects. Now, within the address object constraint, you'd see that now when you define an address object, I can also define metadata or associate metadata along with it. So as you can see, I have a set of applications that I have defined in my environment. They are all IP address based, host based address objects. You can also use host range. And then I am defining that or specific metadata associating with each of these objects, and different combination of values for these two metadata variables are being associated with these objects to denote their state. Now, in terms of the workflow, when we create the address object, as you can see, there's a new column that has been added called assign metadata. And that is where you will define multiple metadata that you would want to associate with this object and also the values for that metadata. In this example, I want to create a resource that has the metadata stage as dev test and PCI as either true or false. In this example, I'm going to set it as true. So this sort of defines the object. And once you have these objects created, then you can directly define policies using this metadata in place of using IP-based object groups or objects. So now that I have created my metadata, the next step for me would be to create the corresponding policies. So go to firewall policies. For my metadata policies, I'll add a rule. So I can now defining access between my resources. So I'm kind of defining access between my dev test resource to resources that's in production with PCI compliance set. So my source zone, I'll select a source zone, and within the source address, I will see a new condition that's added. That's by metadata filter, and here I can define my filters. So as I define the filters that I want to set here, which in this case is stage equals dev test, so you see it will automatically populate the objects that have that, and these would be converted into a single dynamic address group that will be updated to the device. With my source set as stage equals dev test, I'm again going to set my destination as stage is equal to production and PCI equals true. And again, as the conditions are being entered, we will provide a filtered list of objects that will satisfy the condition, which inherently would become part of the dynamic address group when it's created after application to the policy. Now that I have the policy created based on the metadata, I can go through and complete the wizard. And in the next step, we will look at a quick delta configuration to see what is the CLIs that are pushed to the device. Basically, what you would like to see is space itself being registered as the feed server for these dynamic objects, and of course the policies are defined based on these dynamic address groups, which will correspond to the metadata phrases or metadata conditions that I have sent for the policy. So I have the feed server set or the URL set to point towards security director, my dynamic address groups created, as well as those groups used within the firewall policy. It's a quick example of using metadata to create dynamic policies. Thank you for listening. This is Pradeep Nair.